Hello everybody, welcome back to the Grand Torino. Delighted you could join me again. Before we get started, as I always do, please don't forget, press the like button, press the subscription button and the bell, and you'll be reminded of future broadcasts here on the Grand Torino. So today I want to bring on a special guest, a good friend of mine, someone who spoke at one of the IFP, the Irish Freedom Party's conferences a while back. And he spoke, I thought, very eloquently and very succinctly on our participation in the EU as it relates to rural Ireland, particularly now with the beef industry under threat from the new trade agreements. Ladies and gentlemen, John Claffey. John, how are you?
Thank you.
Thanks very much for inviting me to your beautiful home here. Before we get started on the three topics that, as I normally do, I like to set out the premise. You took me around for a tour here today, and I much appreciated that. But explain to me the historical site that's just up around the corner here. We're on the banks of the Shannon.
I brought you down to an old crossing point in the Shannon, when the Shannon was much narrower than it was before there was works done in it. It's the crossing point where the armies retreating from the Battle of Aughrim in 1691, the slaughter and the defeat came back across that way, across the bogs in Galway, across the Shannon and through Offaly and into shelter and hiding and to regain numbers and to recover. And it always strikes me when I'm down there at the Shannon and herding cattle that was a war fought on this soil by three foreign kings. And the independence that we have fought so long and hard for, we just seem to be willing to sign it away if someone dangles some money.
Do you see that from up here? From up here, like in a way, I think you phrase it. We used to think we had problems from migration. We don't remember the invasions, the hardships that Irish people went and fought and died to give us these. I know we keep harking back on it, but we're flippantly throwing it away. It seems we're consumed by consumerism.
There's hardly a square inch in this country that hasn't been fought over, bled over, or argued over, going back from Norman times to English, to Vikings before that, but Normans and to the English. And our independence was so hard got, the repression, the brutality, the death rate in this country from being invaded. And when I hear people talking that immigration is a new thing for Ireland and it's something to be welcomed, I just shake my head, because I'm surrounded by sites around here where it was battles. On the way up to that ground, we passed where what used to be called the Hangman's Tree.
Yeah. And
up to an old landlord's house, and the stables there were used as an RIC barracks in the War of Independence.
I've seen it, yeah.
And there was, back over the years, there was a lot of Irishmen hung from that branch of that tree. Now, I cut that tree down 2 years ago. Some of the old people around about thought it'd be bad luck to cut it down. And I always used to say it would have been better luck if we had cut it down before they could have hung anyone off it. So every time I drive around here, I'm reminded all the time of the history of this country and how hard we had to fight for it.
Very salient, John. So look, let's keep the focus on rural Ireland. And as I said before, I try to set out these conversations with a couple of premises. And first, I want your perspective as a smallholder, as a farmer man yourself. The current state of Irish farming. We might touch upon our EU membership in regards to the subsidies that our farmers are getting, what the new trade deals might entail for them, and can the farmers see what's happening to them now that they're being ousted? And thirdly, the government's little pet baby project that they have, climate change, and the climate change, what they impose to suggest to you guys, or what they're trying to impose on the lads. Cutting the farm herd down for a start. I spoke about that briefly beforehand. 50,000 suckling calves already culled on the EU request. Not a mention of it anywhere. I'm not a Farmer's Journal reader. I'm a city boy. That's why I ask eminent qualified people like yourself. Give us a breakdown on those three.
There's a lot to unpack there. There is a perception, I suppose this is the rural-urban divide, that subsidies have been a boon for farming. But when you look at what subsidies have done since EU membership, the numbers of farmers has declined massively. It's probably down to about maybe 15 or 16,000 full-time farmers now. Full-time. The rest of them have to have a part-time job. Their wife has to be working. If subsidies were to be all and end all, there'd be more competition to be farmers, not less. The beef situation at the moment, I know probably some of your viewers might know there's protests at the moment, but most beef farmers will admit that it's over. That they're either talking of, no matter who you talk to, merchant, the vet, people in the mart, they're saying farmers are they're either going to sell, they're going to plant, or they're going to go into dairying themselves. Dairying has been pushed for years by the government as just the gold standard for farming in the future. there was grants, there was quota given. Then the EU ended quotas, so it was, anyone could go into milk and supply what they want. And so that was the big push, because the government is looking at it from added value, foreign earnings, and job creation. Now, because of the new move on climate change, now they're talking about reducing the dairy herd and maybe putting a limit on expansion.
Yeah.
Now, a lot of farmers have invested a huge amount of money. Like, they would have needed to have known that before they did that. So now, like, typical mixed messages, politicians changing their mind. But a lot of land is going to be planted, and a lot of beef farmers are going out. The knock-on effect on dairying, the increase in the dairy herd has caused a good bit of this, because suckler herd has been reduced. There's more bull calves coming out of the dairy herd. They have to be reared. They are lower quality carcass, less meat, not as good quality. They are going really targeted at the lower end markets where there's a lot more competition with Brazil, Argentina. That has had the effect of pulling down the price and pulling down the price of the elite cattle. Now there's a good few people around about here who buy bull calves at a week, 10 days old from dairy farmers. They rear them and they were selling them at a year old to further finishers. Yeah. And a lot of them were rearing 100, 200, 300 calves a year, the bigger operators. And most of them are saying, after what's happened to the beef price at the moment, they're not doing that next year. So now dairy farmers are faced with a problem next year. Where do they go with all these calves? Now, if we go down the New Zealand route, the New Zealand route is hitting them over the head with a hammer as soon as they hit the ground. Yeah. Now, the Irish dairy farmers, I don't think we can go into that. One thing New Zealand has been very good at is portraying an image of lush, green, happy, healthy Jersey cows. Yeah. Computer generated, dancing in the field, are so happy. The reality of anyone who goes to New Zealand is they come back and they cannot believe the brutality of their system. Just brutal. Really? They have, they don't have to comply with a fraction of the regulatory bodies, the regulations, the environmental concerns. They have slurries going down drains to rivers. They don't have a proper collection service for fallen animals, dead animals. They basically, every farm digs a hole, gets in a digger, digs a huge trench, and every single thing, every single, anything that animal that dies, if an animal is sick, they generally don't even call the vet because it's more trouble than it's worth. It's going to cost money. Just animals go in alive, still alive and dead. All the waste, plastic, goes in, and then when that...
So they really let their standards drop to really...
No, that's what their standards were. Really? They've just been very good at showing the good side of it. Yeah, yeah. Like I read a couple of years ago that the New Zealand Dairy Board were spending 25% of their marketing budget, trying to convince New Zealanders that their dairy industry was clean and green. Never mind trying to sell their product abroad. Yeah, yeah. There's huge pressure coming. The silage pits we have to have, it's obviously on concrete. The silage effluent is probably the most pollutant product that's produced in the farm. The ability of 1 litre of that to destroy hundreds of thousands of litres of water, take out the oxygen out of it, kill fish kills, is massive. That has to be collected and mixed through slurry and spread back on the land.
We have
all that. Yeah. Now, there was a lot of problems over the years with farms and pollution. But when you go back and look at some of those yards that were given trouble, they were all like Teagasc, and going back before Teagasc, ACOT.
These are Irish government bodies.
They were the Irish government bodies, and these were the designs of farmyards that they told farmers to build. And most of those designs have been made obsolete because farmers have no choice but to change them, rip them out, or build over them. The farmyards that are there now, the pollution standards in Ireland are very, very high now in Irish farms. There's very, very little. And what is been there is easily traced back to a farm. Farmers have no problem with a rogue operator getting.
Explain to me then the concept. Don't worry about that. Explain to me the concept behind the trade agreements now. The this downgraded meat that we're going to import to Ireland and pass off as Irish just because it's packaged here. We're opening ourselves up to less secure meat, I feel, as a city boy. Because I know we've gone through stringent processes here to have the highest quality production in meats, and it's renowned and lauded throughout the world. I thought we recently signed a deal with China to allow access to their market because they regard our beef meats and our standards here of production so highly. So why now the capitulation? Because of Europe? Because Europe says it's bringing in is, again, another consequence of Brexit?
No, the policy of the EU since its foundation has been cheap food. I mean, post-war, there was food shortages. Well into the 50s, and it was to produce food. Now, it was too successful and it produced mountains of food that went into waste and into storage. But the policy has never changed. It is cheap food for the worker. The worker spends as little of his income, like I think it's down to about 6% in Ireland now, right, of their wage goes on food. It used to be up on 20, 30, 35%. So there's more money to spend on other sectors of the economy. Yeah. And a lot of the trade deals that the EU has tried to do with what they call the Mercoser countries, Brazil, Argentina's, Uruguay's, that have just vast tracts of land, huge ability to step up production. It has been that their economies have huge agricultural production, but they're not up to the same standard industrially as us. So we do the EU does a trade-off. Yes, we'll take that cheap meat, cheap grain, cheap soya. We get to sell you IT, pharma, big industry, IT, and everything else that goes along with it. It's a trade-off, but it still doesn't disrupt the EU's main policy from the word go. It's cheap food. Cheap food, lots of it.
Cheap food for the cheap labour that's being facilitated by migration, allowing the free movement of labour. So we're getting that undercutment of wages, getting depressed wages with the free movement of labour, in my thing. Yeah. And you're also getting now pressure from this undercutting class of meat being brought in. Touching back on the climate change, talk to me about your perspective of this, the scare that is the forest fires in the rainforest, as to what kind of lands that they're opening up in the acreage to produce this cheap food.
Well, I think the narrative that the Amazon is all burning to the ground, I think that's after collapsing. Because NASA came out with a report saying that they've been monitoring this from space and it's actually below average this year than to other years.
Small quantities of land being burned, but being blown up by the press.
It's blown up by the press. The notion that the Amazon is the lungs of the earth and without it, like, we'll run out of oxygen is absolute nonsense. I think at most 1% of the oxygen that's produced in the Amazon gets into the atmosphere. All the oxygen we're breathing now was created by phytoplankton in the oceans. It came from the oceans.
Don't do science, John.
There's thousands of years of oxygen. If everything in the planet stopped producing oxygen right now, we have thousands of years in the air. Oxygen is actually, we evolved to breathe it. Most plants have evolved to do it, but it's actually toxic. Yeah. We've evolved around it. Too high a concentration of oxygen in the atmosphere is lethal for plant life. The climate change thing has always been that carbon, it went from global cooling in the 70s, then to global warming, then when they could see that there was actually no real trend in temperature increase, suddenly it becomes climate change. That's a very nebulous term because the climate has always changed. Like where we're sitting right now, probably go back 15,000 years and like we would have been under like 2 miles of ice.
Yeah, yeah.
So, I mean, what changed the climate then? It's sun cycles, earth cycles, earth tilts.
That's a very good point. You never mentioned. Nobody brings in the sun cycle. We're going through solar minimus now and stuff like that. About drastic changes. They're all predicting. I know Gemma O'Doherty had Lord Monckton on, and Lord Monckton's travelling throughout the scientific community to express what he sees as a classical mathematician error from the original scientists. And we all know that they're paid now, pushed by big pharma, by all the big conglomerates to push this narrative. But he displayed that the mathematics was off because of classical mathematics. They reread some of the cosines wrong. But also, the two Irish scientists have now proved in peer-reviewed journals now and disproved the nonsense of climate change. But the left won't listen. It's like they have to scare these people into that. We've got 12 years of, change before these drastic changes. Now, Europe is making us cull our beef industry, right, to facilitate the cheap production of meat. But what else are they doing? We'll talk about the producers and the abattoirs, the meat factories, in your relationships with them.
Well, just go back 1 second to run. The movement from global cooling to warming to climate change to carbon taxes was CO2. Now they're just, they're just calling it carbon. Yeah. Guess what's made of carbon? We're mostly, carbon.
We produce
so it's now we're the problem. It's not the carbon dioxide. Now it's we're the problem. It's the biggest scam ever tried on the general public. Trillions of euros, dollars has been thrown at, and trillions more will be thrown at. But I think the industrialized countries now, they're paying it lip service. They all know that it's not a problem. Put it this way. Barack Obama was one of the people who said we have like a few years to change. He's after buying a beach house for 15 million that's only a few feet above sea level. The banks haven't stopped giving out 30-year mortgages on seaside property.
Yeah.
It's the banks.
The banks are saying it's the same in Florida, where they're projecting the water rises to increase over 10 years by a metre or 2 metre. Yet insurance companies and banks are still hedging their money on the Florida coastline and selling mortgages because they know that climate change isn't going to change. So they wouldn't be issuing mortgages if they thought in 10 years the whole place is going to be underwater.
One of the most idiotic things I've heard is people freaking out about the Arctic melting. Yeah. And that it's going to be ice-free and our sea levels are going to rise, the sea level is going to rise. The Arctic isn't on a landmass. It's ice floating on water. It's already displaced. If all the ice in the Arctic melted, it wouldn't raise the sea level one bit.
I want to finish the little point on something that Ocasio-Cortez recently came out with in relation to the Hurricane Dorian that's now just about to make landfall in the United States and Florida. But she said, we wouldn't have this problem. I could see everybody running out to get fresh supplies of gasoline and food for the hurricane, but we wouldn't have this problem if we had electric cars and all that. Not realising that the fucking wind farms are all going to get destroyed. And, you need gasoline and blah, blah, blah. She made a complete haze. But come back to me on the current situation. The small holdings, like we're seeing down in Stokestown, the big farmers the banks trying to take back the land, the small shareholdings, effectively giving them purpose-built loans for the cattle sheds, and then they couldn't meet demands in the loans, so now they're coming back. They've entrapped them with honeypot loans.
A lot of the problem with farmers that have got into big financial trouble like that, it's very seldom, there is cases, it's very seldom it's because the shed they built was too big. Yeah. Or they went too fancy with machinery. It's generally, because those ice spends there's capital allowances against your tax. The machinery is higher purchase, it's tax deductible. Right. That's generally just been written off against the tax bill. Now, if I start going into that, I'm going to be here all day, right? But I'll stay clear of that for now. A lot of what happened pre-crash, and I used to be a religious buyer of the Farmers Journal. If I didn't get that early on a Thursday, I thought I was missing out, right? Because I wanted to see what was going on. It's a paper I hardly ever buy now. But I remember the couple of years building up to the crash, agricultural consultants, whose main job was filling up paperwork for subsidies or for a grant application, suddenly became financial consultants. And they would have an advertorial or a page on the Farmers Journal. Now, the Farmers Journal has never faced up and admitted to their role in this, right? People trust the Farmers Journal. They trust their consultant because they've worked with him going, oh yeah, he did all that paperwork right. He kept everything right with the department. I didn't get fined. I didn't get in trouble. Suddenly these financial controllers, their mantra was, and remember the price of good agricultural land back just before the crash was up on 25,000 an acre. Wow. And their whole mantra was, look, if you have 100 acres, you're sitting on 2 million euros. Like, what return are you getting out of that 100 acres? Are you making even 15, 20,000 a year? Release equity from your farm and put it into equities. Equities, the mantra was with our court astrologer type economists, they all seem to have a hive mind. Equities outperform in the long run. Equities always outperform the stock market. And an awful lot of farmers released equity from their farm. If they had a 200-300 acre farm, worth up to anywhere 4 to 6 million, some of them took out 2 million. They invested it in bank shares. Right. Because these same advisors were saying bank shares are only going one way. Yeah. They invested in bank shares, and we all know what happened to bank shares. But suddenly their loan is due, and they have 2 million of a loan. Yeah. And that 300 acre farm was maybe leaving 40, 50, 60,000 a year in profit. So an awful lot of them got into trouble for that. Right. Or they borrowed money against their released equity against their farm and started buying houses. Like, we were a nation ruled by landlords. I know landlord's house is on my land. Mr. Lestrange, not his real name, but he was strange, so they called him Lestrange, and it stuck. It's still the name of the house. We were, for hundreds of years, a nation of tenants. And most of our uprisings, whenever came from the unfair treatment of it. And as soon as we get money, everyone's ambition is to be a landlord. And Kevin Myers had a brilliant article, I think he was still writing for the Times. No, it was Independent, sorry. and he was talking about the migration flow in 2004 when the EU expanded into the east. And he said that in the space of 4 or 5 years, 700,000 to 800,000 people moved here.
Wow.
And he made the point that that was the biggest population flow at any time in European history as a proportion, as a percentage of the country they were moving into. We had a population of about 3.2 million. 700,000 to 800,000 people coming in there is huge.
Massive.
That fueled the housing boom.
Yeah.
That fueled the price of land going ballistic for development. That brought up the price of agricultural land. Farmers were being told farming is giving a very poor return, release money. You're building houses for migrants who are essentially moving here.
Are we doing that again now?
Oh yeah, we're doing that now. The whole bottom falls out of it. And it's Irish people who have to pick up the can.
Yeah.
That is happening again. I mean, they say our population now is 5 million. Did you see that report? There was a report there recently from the sewage system in Ringsend in Dublin?
No.
It's completely working past its capacity. Billions of litres going in every day untreated. And they say that what they reckon the population of Dublin is 2.3 million.
Yeah, the stats were saying 1.4, yeah, I could easily imagine it double.
They're reckoning 2.3.
So there's the clear indication there that the real world situation, as was happening in London, when you see the sewage system, the Victorian system couldn't handle the sewage. We're getting the same thing here because the reported numbers that are here doesn't really equate to what the sewage system is supposed to run at capacity, so it's not. And we've also, by admission, by their own design, they say there's something like 30,000 illegals in the country. You know, in fact, I'm not saying they're all in Dublin and stuff like that, but they're not giving us, I think, statistically correct, or they're giving us 2 years census reports, like from 2016, I think is one of the latest, which showed again that, you know, foreign nationals are taking up the highest percentage of social housing, taking up the bigger percentage of, in healthcare and all that kind of stuff for taking up beds and all that kind of stuff.
Well, one stat I saw on that was, like the census. They take the figures off the census. A lot of people don't fill it in.
Yeah.
And
it's not a reliable source.
I know we're going off the topic of farming here now, but it is going to affect everyone who owns anything in this country.
Yeah.
Because this is all going to have to be paid for.
I think that stemmed from the flow because we tripped into the territory of landlords. You know, it was a great analogy that, you know, for years we've strived to get away. Most of our uprisings came from tenants advocacy and tenants being poorly treated. And now we've jumped the gun now with a bit of false illusion of cash. And it is very much a false illusion because what are we standing there now? 208, 210 billion in debt. And looking to increase that again to bring more people in for what? So that the income tax levels can be raised on higher earners.
I don't want to scare you. Everyone sees that headline figure of 210 billion. That's the headline figure.
Yeah, I think it's up at 890 or something.
It's it's over 600 billion because it's unfunded liabilities.
Yeah.
And I think what the strategy is that, okay, we keep getting told that there's never been as many people employed in the country. GDP keeps growing by 7-8%.
Our people is our greatest strength. That's what their leader is.
Yeah, our populations are our greatest strength. What we are is tax cattle.
Yeah.
I think the strategy is that they know the wheels are going to come off the wagon and that they need as many people here paying tax. Doesn't matter if it's a low wage job, paying some tax, because all these unfunded liabilities will come out day-to-day cash receipts.
And get out of government before the penny drops, and maybe you bring in the Greens or bring in Fianna Fáil, let somebody else take up the fall for it.
Well, I think what's going to happen, why I see all this affecting rural Ireland, is that if I was to sell my farm in the morning, I'm getting out of here. I'm going travelling, I'm going to get in a boat and I'm going sailing the oceans. And I sell all that. 35% capital gains tax. Which means at the moment the government owns 35% of my farm. Now that's an arbitrary rate. When the wheels start to fall off this wagon, don't forget, in the first quarter of this year, despite a record employment, we have crazy levels of tax. VAT at 23%, the increases that were put in to deal with the crash, despite us being in a so-called, mini boom now, have never come back down. The first 3 months there were 900 million in the red. So if that continues, that is running a deficit of heading on 4 billion with record employment and high taxes. So it doesn't take much of a shock to something that fragile to bring the whole lot crashing down. What I can see is just cap it. They will not be able to borrow. They won't be able to tax anymore. What I'm going to see, you'll see something like rates coming in on land.
Yeah.
And it'll be disguised as some kind of climate thing. Yeah. The contribution farmers have to make. Now, just in the few miles we did around about here, but it's nearly anywhere in the country. like looking out the window, all you see is trees and vegetation and hedgerows. The fields in this country are small. The contribution of the countryside to the environment vastly outweighs anything that farming is doing. Just something we were discussing earlier, like Ireland produces, and I'm not sure how exactly they must be on the total calorie basis of the amount of food we produce, multiplying by calories and dividing by average calorie intake. Because say we produce enough food in the Republic to feed 40 million people.
Yeah, I heard that. But
this country is producing about a quarter of the food it could. Because there's a huge amount of land underutilised. And most of the cattle in this country, like organics are a niche market. Most of the cattle in this country are effectively organic. Because most vets will tell you farmers aren't dosing enough, injecting enough. They're not spending the money on it, they're not doing the work on it.
They're not being contaminated, is it?
Well, yeah, but like most of it is organic. If land was pushed a lot harder with fertiliser, more reseeding, better drainage, more lime being spread, like they say, the last 10 years soil fertility in this country has just fallen off a cliff. We are not replenishing. This is what we're taking out. The ability of this country to produce food, I don't think we've even really tapped it yet. Yeah. But the depletion of our soils was also government policy when they brought in the first environmental schemes. That was an EU thing to cut production. And most people will now say it was called REPS, Rural Environmental Planning Scheme. Right. And most people will tell you now that was an absolute environmental disaster. Because suddenly, like, there was caps put on phosphate, phosphorus, especially phosphorus. There was no cap put on phosphate, phosphorus and nitrogen. Right. So farmers were taking more out of land than they were putting back in. And most people saw their land getting really seriously depleted. The big thing was when you take a cut crop of silage, that you're taking a huge amount of nutrients off the land. You have to go back in before you take it, and then after you take it, to grow the crop. Yeah. You weren't allowed to go back in. So land got run down. Lime usage has really dropped here. The interference through the EU is not environmentally friendly.
Speaking about your speech you made at the IFP, and that was strategies for benefits for leaving the EU?
Yes.
Or how we could extract ourselves, the farming industry could extract us. Speakers, finish off on that, let's round off on that.
Yeah. Well, I contend that subsidies have been negative, the effect of subsidies. They haven't protected the small supplier. The small farmer was not able to survive in that. It's not that long ago, 3 or 4, every couple of years there's a rejig on EU subsidies. And just a huge dogfight starts on where the money's going to go. The budget is always getting smaller in real terms. It's never been increased, index linked with inflation. A dogfight starts on where it's going to go. There's always lobby groups and NGOs coming in going, we need to divert it to this, that and the other. And it has really had the effect of making bigger farmers bigger all over Europe. And it has done that here as well. Most farmers in Ireland are part-time. Not only are they part-time, but their wife is working as well. If subsidies really were the be-all and end-all, that wouldn't have to be the case. And they have created a sense and a system of dependency and it is, you start to discipline yourself because you're worried about these inspections. And most farmers will tell you, like, some of these inspections, like, they are Gestapo. Really? Yeah, they have the right at the moment to come in here, tell you to sit in your chair, come up without a warrant, make you sit in your chair and go through your house if they suspect that there's fraud or someone reports you for something or other. Arbitrarily, they can come in, they can take all your animals, they can seize everything, they can basically shut you down for what may be a breach.
Minor infractions.
Well, could be minor or it could be nothing. Yeah. And they will land with guards, and if you resist, you get arrested. Sorry. And you spend the night in a cell, or you're brought in front of a judge.
Police force, whatever.
So that's not a system that's based on trying to protect rural Ireland or promote rural Ireland or promote farming. That is a system designed to create dependency and fear. And we produce top quality food, really do. Beef and milk here is top class. This grass-fed notion has become a fad in a lot of countries because a lot of their herds are containment herds. They're in the shed all day, every day. This grass-fed attracts a premium. All of our stock is grass-fed. So we can we should be promoting and looking for market share on our quality. Subsidies haven't done that. Our beef industry is about to get wiped out. I think, I'll have to check, but I think off the top of my head, there was the usual bun fight in a shake-up of the EU subsidy scheme for agriculture. I think Franz Fischler was the commissioner. And he actually seriously proposed that farmers be paid to produce below the cost of production.
Wow.
It basically would have made every farmer in Europe a serf. Now, it didn't get to go through like that. But imagine getting a system in where every litre of milk I sell, every animal I sell, I have sold at a loss. Now I am dependent on that check coming in October and December to make up the difference that I can survive. Now that's how you produce a feudal society of serfs.
That's where we're heading though, aren't we?
We are heading that way, yeah.
People laugh at us because they think we'll round off and finish off on that, but they think we're dog whistling, or we're trying to talk in economic sense, that we're trying to forebode or trying to forewarn about what's a very real possibility of clashes, cultural clashes in the cities. But when when resources start becoming scarce, you know, if the farm, like the beef, is taken out and then we're fighting over second-class meat coming from Brazil. And I say second-class meat because it's come from a different level of standards to be maintained and produced that doesn't equate to ours. So we're seen to be heading in a model that
is globalization in a nutshell.
Globalization in a nutshell.
That is a just-in-time policy where there is basically a week's supply of food of a lot of items in the country. You're depending on that ship coming across the sea. You're depending on a container ship coming from South America or coming around through the Suez Canal. This kind of a just-in-time thing. Someone had a story, was it a couple of years ago? A Nile pipeline, I think it was in Phoenix, Arizona. Burst. And that was supplying fuel for cars, lorries, whatever. No fuel got to this town for 3 or 4. Within 3 days, armed militia gangs had formed, and it was Mad Max style, and they were hijacking fuel trucks and bringing it back to Phoenix and selling at 5, 6, 10 times the price.
But that never happened here. That's only in the movies, John.
It took 3 days of no fuel. Yeah. And the entire system of globalization is based on a just-in-time and everything coming from everywhere. It doesn't, again, the system is so fragile to any kind of an external shock. Like we're just waiting for a little bump. Like we know Deutsche Bank.
We don't make toilet paper in this country anymore.
No, we don't produce anymore. We don't produce. We're consumers, and we're set up for the fall.
Yeah.
Sign me off now before we say goodbye. I think we've rounded off. You'd be in favour, as I would be, for a national government, maybe controlled immigration, you know, all the usual stuff to affect it. How would you see that playing out in effects to city dwellers, to rural Ireland, if we got control of the reins again? As you say, as Irish people, we should be looking to control our own destinies. We are very capable of looking after this island ourselves and welcoming people that need help. Yeah. But we must maintain ourselves first and not give it all away at virtue signalling to help. We can't help the rest of the world. We must maintain this first, and then we can produce food, produce stuff quite easily. You know, once we maintain our own manufacturing.
I think it is a part flaw in the Irish character. And some people have said that it's as a result of hundreds of years of being colonised and the boot being on your face, that there's a class of people who get above that and they become, you know, the greasers of wheels and the lackeys because it makes things a little bit better for them. We may have got rid of English rule, but we still seem to have that section of wheel greasers, and we replaced one empire with another empire. We are not in control of our borders. We're not in control of our laws. We don't even have our own currency anymore. What do we actually have? What do we as Irish people have control of in this country?
Are we just going to quite happily let the unelected leaders in Brussels, as they've been plainly seen time and time again, enabling false policies, restricting farmers by more regulations and doing it? And now, and I keep bringing it back to this deal because I know it's incensed the beef thing, because they know the writing's on the wall. As you said, they're transitioning their land holdings now to grazing or dairy, whatever they can, because the beef, why? It was such a prime resource and it's been given away. Same as the drilling rights to the Chinese now, the mining rights to more Norwegian and Canadian things. We're probably sitting on mountains of gold and we're giving it away.
Well, we could be, but post-crash and Ireland and agriculture, I think some of those ministers, could have been Mary Coughlin, she called farming a sunset industry. It's not really important anymore. When the crash came, and I have heard this from merchants and suppliers in this area especially, I'm sure it's the same everywhere else. After the crash came, the only thing that kept their businesses going were farmers. And it didn't take long for politicians to suddenly realise that farming exports became a very, very strong part of our GNP. That suddenly farming got talked up and farming was important. But now we are going to be sacrificed now for climate change. 40%, we keep hearing this figure, 40% of our emissions are agricultural emissions. And that is way higher than Germany, France, the UK. What they never say is, like, most people probably realise why. We skipped first phase industrialisation. We kind of went to third, nearly started at third stage from the 70s on. It's IT, it's pharma, it's computers, it's financial. We don't have the foundries, the old style chemical plants that industrial Germany would have had, industrial England would have had, France. So of course our emissions are higher because we don't have the heavy industries that churn through huge amounts of energy to produce their product. 40% emissions. So we produce the second lowest, I think it's per kilo of milk and per litre, or litre of milk and kilo of beef. I think we have the second lowest emissions per kilo and litre in the world. Yeah. And I think only New Zealand beats us. And their environmental record is shocking. So we're at the top of the tree. But they're good. That's the branch. Well,
we're being sold a lie then. We're being sold a lie to the climate change
nonsense. It's total nonsense.
Yeah. I mean, I want to finish out on, I don't want to let, as much as I castigate Fine Gael all the way through, it Fianna Fáil there, your man Micheál Martin saying the exact same, we can no longer afford rural Ireland. What does he mean by that? I mean, I don't want to go down and talk about planters and all this kind of stuff, but we're bringing in another complex, the asylum complex, to sort of reinvigorate rural Ireland, because they underinvested in it for years. They isolated it in communications, 3G, it's been barrenized, shops, villages closing down. But if we bring this huge amount of people and we develop them into the welfare class system, and then we create this second generation welfare class system, because I was nearly going to say it. I was going to say it here. I'm not going to let it do. We've got Irish men and women in whatever class bringing in cleaners to clean their own home. So we've got our own, I'm not going to say slave class, but underclass of black labour marketeers, and we're quite happy to quaff it because we see Mr. Jones, who's got 3 or 4, who's a landlord, or the next door neighbours renting out 3 or 4 bedrooms and they're cleaning up, and we're quite happy to facilitate what we, in essence, happened to us by getting shipped out by being,
Well, I don't know who said it, what European leaders said it, but you can't maintain your culture and civilization with other countries' children.
On that note, John, I'm going to leave it right there. Thanks very much for that great conversation. Ladies and gentlemen, John Claffey. If you like what you're seeing here, please, I implore you, I beseech you, I importune you. Don't forget, press the like button, press the subscription and the bell, and you'll be reminded of future conversations on the Gran Torino. Don't forget, we've also got the Gran Torino merch. Please head over to the website, World Wide Web, grantorino.ie, or just follow the Teespring link here. I importune you. Don't forget, support this platform. Keep us going so that we can keep these and other great conversations and other reports around the country to keep you abreast of what's really going on here in Ireland. Us.